Hi, I want to tell you something I did not expect to admit. My mother's version of retirement was better than mine. Not richer, not easier, not more comfortable, certainly not better funded. My mother did not have the savings I have. She did not have the travel I have. She did not have a house in Florida, a carefully paid mortgage, a neat folder for Medicare papers, adult children who could handle their own lives, and enough room in the budget that groceries don't require a conversation. She had much less. And yet there was something about the way she got older that I misunderstood for most of my life. I thought she had settled. I thought she had accepted a small life because that was the only one available to her. That was my mistake. My mother, Miriam, had a version of retirement that was built around usefulness, rhythm, modest pleasures, and people who expected to see her. Mine was built at first around freedom, space, options, open calendars, the kind of life I spent decades earning. And then I got it, and I discovered something uncomfortable. Too many options can make a day feel thinner, not fuller. Richard saw this before I did. He usually does, which is irritating and useful in equal amounts. One morning he watched me rearrange a day that had nothing wrong with it, and he said, "Your mother would have known what to do with a Tuesday." I said nothing, because he was right, and I hated that he was right. The fear was not that I had failed at retirement. That would have been simpler. The fear was that I had built the wrong kind of freedom. I had spent most of my adult life building things, businesses, systems, relationships, a reputation, a calendar that looked like evidence. I was good at being busy. I was good at being needed. I was good at being in motion. Then retirement arrived and I had the financial structure. I had the nice house. I had the time. I had the wardrobe for lunch. I had the right shoes for every room I entered. And some mornings still felt strangely empty. You wake up and there is nothing you have to rescue. No client waiting, no staff question, no flight to catch, no meeting to dress for. And that feels odd. Not good weird, just weird. My mother never seemed to have that problem. She did not call it reinvention. She did not announce a new chapter. She never used language like that. She would have found it theatrical. She simply had a life that continued after work stopped being the center of it. I'm not going to give you a theory. I'm going to tell you what I noticed about her retirement, what I got wrong about my own, and why the woman who had far less may have understood far more. We're in my mother's kitchen. Not recently, of course. She's been gone for years. But I can still see it with an unreasonable amount of detail. The small table near the window, the tea towels folded over the oven handle, the little dish where she kept safety pins, buttons, and one key nobody ever identified. The phone cord stretched too far because she refused to replace it with a cordless one for reasons she considered obvious and nobody else understood. She was probably in her early 70s then. I was in my 40s, very important in my own mind, and wearing a suit that cost too much for a woman who was about to eat tuna salad at her mother's kitchen table. I had stopped by between meetings. I remember putting my bag on the chair as if the chair were lucky to have it. My mother looked at me for about 3 seconds and said, "You look tired in expensive fabric." That was Miriam. No flourish, no cruelty, just the exact sentence. I said I was fine. She said, "People who are fine don't say it that quickly." Then she poured tea. There was no lecture. She was not a lecturing woman. She had a way of making you arrive at the point yourself, which is worse, because then you cannot even resent the speaker properly. She told me about her morning. The neighbour downstairs had called because she couldn't open a jar. My mother walked down, opened it, stayed for coffee, came back upstairs, changed the sheets, read the paper, and was going to the market later because the fish man came on Wednesdays. I remember thinking, this is very small. That was the word in my head, small. I am embarrassed to say that now, because what I called small was actually stable. What I called ordinary was actually rooted. What I called nothing much was a day she knew how to inhabit, and I didn't know how to do that yet. So I want to go through the parts of my mother's retirement that I understand differently now, not because I want to become my mother. I couldn't even if I tried. She had a kind of natural composure I have to manufacture before breakfast, but I see now that she had answers I dismissed because they did not look ambitious. And some of those answers would have saved me a great deal of confusion. The first thing my mother had, and I did not, was a real daily rhythm that did not need applause. My early retirement had a calendar problem. Not that it was too full. That would have been familiar. It was too negotiable. Every day could become anything, which sounds luxurious until you discover that anything often becomes very little. I had choices stacked on top of choices. Exercise now or later. Read now or later. Call Sophie now or later. Go to lunch or not. Travel or stay home. Work on a project or pretend not to have one. My mother did not live that way. She had a rhythm, not a schedule in the modern sense. No color-coded blocks, no optimized morning, no app congratulating her for drinking water. She had Tuesday. Tuesday meant laundry, a phone call to her sister, and chicken soup if the weather had the slightest excuse. Wednesday meant the fish market. Friday meant the house was brought into order before evening, not perfectly, just respectfully. When I was younger, this looked limiting. Now I see it was liberating. She did not wake up every morning and renegotiate her identity. She knew what the day was for. I don't fully understand why that matters so much, but it does. There is a cost to constant reinvention. Even small reinvention, even deciding every morning what kind of woman you are going to be now that work no longer decides for you. Richard figured this out quickly. Of course he did. He retired earlier than I did, and within 6 weeks he had a route, a coffee place, a book pile, and a chair on the terrace that became, in some legal sense, his territory. I watched this with irritation. I thought, is that it? Yes, apparently, in many ways, that is it. My mother understood something I had to learn with more expensive furniture around me. A day does not have to be impressive to hold you together. The second thing she had was usefulness without performance. That is different from importance. I was important in certain rooms, or I believed I was. People waited for my opinion. They wanted my approval. They sent documents and asked what I thought. I knew how to be useful when the stakes were visible. My mother was useful in quieter ways. She remembered who had a doctor's appointment. She knew which neighbour's son had lost his job. She kept extra soup in containers that had once held something else. She wrote birthday cards early because, as she said, the male has no respect for emotion. I used to think she gave herself away. I don't think that anymore. I think she stayed connected through small acts that did not require anyone to admire her. There's a version of this story where I look good. That's not the one I'm telling. In my first year of retirement, Sophie called me one afternoon. She was tired. The children were both in strange moods. Noah had negotiated bedtime like a labour attorney, and Claire had hidden one shoe because she was done with shoes as a concept. I immediately offered solutions. I could send dinner. I could come over. I could recommend a better routine. I could ask if Adam was helping enough, which is a question that appears helpful and is usually not. Sophie went quiet. Then she said, "Mum, I don't need a board chair. I just need my mother." That landed, not gracefully. I wish it had. I probably got defensive first. I usually do when something is true too early. My mother would have known what to do. She would have said, "I'm coming over with food," and then she would have arrived with food and no analysis. She would not have turned exhaustion into a discussion about systems. She understood practical love. I understood strategic assistance. Those are not the same thing. I have had to learn usefulness that does not perform competence. Sometimes I bring soup. Sometimes I sit with Claire while Sophie takes a call. Sometimes I listen and do not improve the story. That last one remains a developing skill. Richard would say, very developing. He would be correct, and I would prefer not to dwell on it. The third thing my mother had was a smaller appetite for novelty. This may be the most unfashionable thing, I believe. My mother did not need every season of life to feel fresh. She liked what she liked. The same bakery, the same lipstick shade, the same black shoes repaired twice beyond what was financially rational. The same seat near the window if we went for lunch. I used to mistake this for lack of imagination. Now I suspect it was contentment. When I retired, I had this idea that I should expand. More travel, more experiences, more restaurants, more classes, more invitations, more of whatever I had postponed while I was working. I had earned it, and there was truth in that. But more is not a personality. It can become another form of work. There was a month when Richard and I had too many dinners. That sounds like a ridiculous complaint. I can hear it, I know. But we had said yes to everything. Friends from New York, a charity event, a couple we barely knew, a dinner connected to someone I used to advise, a birthday, a thing after the birthday. By the end of it, I was standing in my closet looking at very nice clothes and feeling nothing but resistance. Richard looked in and said, "We're not being social, we're being booked." That was exactly right. My mother would never have done that. She liked people. She was not withdrawn. But she understood the dignity of enough company, enough errands, enough newness, enough talking. She protected ordinary evenings with a seriousness I only understand now. There is a kind of wealth in not needing to be entertained all the time. I did not learn that early. I had to become tired of my own options. The fourth thing my mother had was a relationship with money that was calmer than mine, even though she had less of it. This is the part that still humbles me. My father Harold was an accountant, careful, precise, warm in a quiet way. My mother learned money not as theory but as reality, what came in, what went out, what could wait, what could not. They were not poor in the way people use the word carelessly, but there was no excess. My mother knew the price of everything in the house, not because she was anxious, because paying attention was a form of respect. I grew up and built more, much more. I am not going to pretend money doesn't matter. It matters. I like comfort. I like good sheets. I like not thinking about the price of fish unless I choose to. I spent enough years doing hard things to stop apologizing for a comfortable chair. But here's what I actually think. My mother had less money and less fear around ordinary spending. I had more money and more complicated feelings about what money was supposed to prove. That is not flattering. When you've built something, money becomes mixed with identity. Safety, yes, but also proof. Proof that the hard years counted. Proof that the sacrifices had meaning. proof that you did not waste your ambition. My mother did not use money that way. A dollar was a dollar, useful, limited, not emotional. She could buy a good coat and wear it for 10 years without making the coat into a statement about her worth. I could buy 3 coats and still be deciding which version of myself I was trying to dress. There was one winter visit when she took me to a small shop because she needed gloves. Not wanted, needed. Her old pair had finally given up. She tried on 2 pairs, chose one, paid $24, put them in her purse and said, "Good, that's solved. Good, that's solved." I think about that sentence more than a person should think about gloves, because I was rarely that clean. I could turn a purchase into a referendum. Was it elegant? Was it appropriate? Was it too much? Was it not enough? Did it say success without saying effort? My mother simply bought the gloves. That was all. The 5th thing she had was a kind of belonging I did not realize she had built. Not dramatic belonging, no grand community project, no title, no committee with her name on a plaque, just people. The woman at the bakery who saved the rye bread if my mother was late, the neighbour who called her about the jar, the cousin who annoyed her every Thursday, the woman from synagogue who always knew everyone's business and pretended it was concern. My mother had a web, quiet, imperfect, reliable. I had networks. There is a difference. Networks are useful. I built many. Some of them mattered deeply. Some of them were just elegant arrangements of mutual advantage. That is not a criticism, it's a description. But a network can go quiet when the work stops. A web does not. A web is who notices if you don't show up. After I retired, I discovered that many people liked me best in motion. That is not their fault. That was how they knew me. I was the woman at the lunch, the meeting, the business dinner, the conversation where something might happen. Once I was no longer connected to movement, some relationships naturally loosened. I expected that. I didn't expect to feel it. My mother had fewer names in her life, but more people who knew the shape of her week. That matters as you get older. It matters more than being admired. I remember calling her once and asking what she was doing. She said, "Waiting for Ruth to complain." Ruth was her friend. Every afternoon around 4, Ruth called and complained about her knee, her son, the building superintendent, and sometimes the weather, which she held personally responsible for several disappointments. I asked my mother if she found that exhausting. She said, "A little, but I would miss her if she stopped." That is a retirement philosophy in one sentence. Not the clean kind, the true kind. People are inconvenient. They repeat themselves. They call at the wrong time. They need things. They misunderstand you. They remember the old version of you and resist the new one. And still, I would miss her if she stopped. My version of retirement became better when I stopped treating relationships as something to fit around my life and started seeing them as part of the structure of the life itself. Again, I learned this late. I seem to specialize in elegant delays. The 6th thing my mother had was no interest in becoming a completely new woman. This may be the most merciful part. She did not treat aging as a branding exercise. She was herself, continued, changed, yes, softer in some ways, sharper in others, less patient with foolishness, which was inconvenient for anyone related to her. But she did not wake up after my father retired and ask, "Who am I now?" She knew. She was Miriam, wife, mother, friend, woman with opinions about tailoring, person who could stretch a chicken into 3 meals and still make you feel underfed emotionally if you disappointed her. When I retired, I kept asking identity questions. Who am I without the work? What am I building now? What should this stage mean? Those are not bad questions, but too much questioning can become another way to avoid living. Richard said something about this that annoyed me enough to remember it. We were sitting outside, morning, coffee. The light was very soft, which always makes him more philosophical than necessary. He said, "Maybe you don't have to become someone else. Maybe you have to stop over-explaining the person you already are." I said, "That's almost useful." He smiled, infuriating man. But he was pointing at something real. My mother did not narrate herself. She lived. Not perfectly. I don't want to turn her into a statue. She could be stubborn. She could hold a grudge with impressive posture. She once refused to speak to a cousin for 11 months over a comment about brisket. She was human. But she was not constantly evaluating whether her humanity looked meaningful enough. That is what I envy. Not her limitations, her settledness. She was not waiting for the next version of herself to arrive. She had already made room for the current one. I don't think my mother's retirement was better because it was simpler in the sentimental way people say simple. It was not simple. Aging is not simple. Marriage is not simple. Money, family, loss, bodies changing, friends disappearing from the table one by one. None of that is simple. Her version was better because it was less abstract. It had Tuesday in it. It had soup in it. It had Ruth calling at 4. It had gloves that cost $24 and solved exactly one problem. It had a woman who did not confuse freedom with emptiness. I had to learn that from a distance, which is often how mothers teach us after they're gone, not by appearing with a lesson, by becoming clearer once we're old enough to be embarrassed by how much we missed. I still like my life. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Richard and I are comfortable. Sophie is close. Jonathan calls from New York more than he admits. Noah negotiates everything. Claire remains a legal threat in a 6-year-old body. We have good days. We have ordinary days. We have days where I stand in a closet and own too many versions of the same blouse. But I think differently now. I do not want retirement to be one long tribute to what I earned. I want it to become a life I can actually inhabit. My mother had that. I am still learning it. If something in this landed for you, leave a comment. I'm curious about one specific thing. Was there someone older in your life who understood retirement or aging better than you realized at the time? A mother, a father, an aunt, a neighbor, someone who had less language for it, but maybe more wisdom. Tell me what they did, not what they preached, what they actually did with their days. I find those stories useful, more useful than I expected to, and, if I'm honest, they make me feel less alone in the process of becoming older than I once imagined myself being. Richard reads some of the comments too. He pretends he doesn't. He is not convincing. All right, I think that's what I wanted to say.